In 2009, a terrifying outbreak began after people were bitten by infected bats. The victims transformed into vampires and quickly started biting other humans, causing the infection to spread at an uncontrollable rate. Medical experts never had enough time to develop a cure, and within a decade, nearly 90% of the world's population had become vampires. 10 years later, vampires have adapted to their new reality and now live lives that look surprisingly similar to those of ordinary humans. They vote, run businesses, work regular jobs, and maintain society as usual. Meanwhile, the remaining 5% of humanity has gone into hiding to avoid becoming food. Because fresh human blood has become extremely scarce, society is facing a serious crisis. One homeless vampire, driven by hunger, nearly attacks another vampire who happens to be walking home. However, security forces constantly patrol the city and quickly prevent any trouble. As mentioned earlier, finding a real human has become almost impossible. If one is discovered, they are immediately hunted down. Even stores that once sold everyday necessities now mainly sell bags of fresh blood instead. The story centers on a scientist named Edward, who works for Bromley Marks, the largest blood supply corporation in America. The company collects and distributes blood across the world. In many ways, the process resembles a beverage factory harvesting fruit and extracting its juice. To maintain supplies, Bromley Marks captures the remaining humans and keeps them inside specialized pods connected to medical tubes. These humans are essentially farmed so their blood can be harvested continuously. With the blood shortage becoming increasingly severe, Edward and the company's executives hold a meeting to discuss the consequences. They explain that vampires who go too long without fresh blood become stressed, unstable, and eventually insane. Their physical appearance also begins to deteriorate dramatically. The company's CEO, Charles Bromley, has high hopes for a synthetic blood substitute that Edward has been developing for several months. Tests on a vampire monkey appeared successful, and Charles now wants to begin human trials in front of the board of directors. Unfortunately, the experiment ends in disaster. The synthetic blood fails, and the vampire test subject dies. Disappointed, Edward heads home, wondering what ingredient is still missing from the formula. During the drive, he notices that the tips of his ears have begun to lengthen, a sign that he has gone too long without consuming fresh blood. Suddenly, because he is distracted, Edward accidentally crashes into another vehicle. When he discovers that the passengers are genuine human survivors, his conscience immediately takes over. Rather than reporting them, he quickly hides all three inside his own car just as a police patrol approaches. While Edward distracts the officer, one of the survivors, a woman named Audrey, accidentally finds Edward's ID card. To her surprise, she discovers that he is a scientist. After Edward convinces the police that the survivors escaped into the forest, Audrey quickly slips away without saying a word. Back at home, Edward watches a news report revealing that the government has expanded underground tunnel systems so vampires can move around safely during daylight hours. The report also warns citizens to strengthen security around their homes, as crime rates are rising due to the growing shortage of human blood. A short while later, Edward receives an unexpected visit from his younger brother, Frankie, whom he hasn't seen in months. Wanting to reconnect, Frankie brings him a bottle of fresh human blood that he somehow managed to obtain. But Edward refuses the gift. He has made a personal vow not to drink human blood unless his life absolutely depends on it. Unfortunately, the scent of fresh blood attracts something terrifying. A monstrous vampire suddenly appears outside the house. These creatures are known as subsiders, starving vampires who have mutated after going too long without blood. Over time they lose their intelligence, become completely feral, and can never return to their normal vampire form. They attack anything they can find, including other vampires and, especially, humans. After the creature is eliminated, security officers arrive and explain that the rising cost of blood has left many poorer vampires unable to survive. As a result, more and more of them are transforming into subsiders, forcing police units to patrol the city and destroy them whenever they appear. Later that night, Edward is awakened by his home's security alarm. To his surprise, it's Audrey. Because Edward spared her earlier, Audrey believes he is different from other vampires. She offers him an opportunity to help restore civilization and reverse what has happened to the world. She doesn't explain much, but before leaving she hands him an address and tells him that if he truly wants change, he should come meet her there. The next day at work, Edward receives a stern warning from Charles Bromley. The CEO is becoming increasingly frustrated that the synthetic blood project still isn't complete. The blood shortage is hurting the company's profits, and several foreign investors have already started pulling their funding. After the meeting, Edward can't stop thinking about Audrey's proposal. Eventually, curiosity gets the better of him. He drives to the location using a specially modified vehicle designed to protect vampires from sunlight, allowing them to travel safely during the day. Upon arriving at a secluded area beneath a large tree, Edward is introduced to Audrey's friend, a former vampire named Elvis. At first, Edward refuses to believe him. To prove his story, Elvis shows the scars from an old vampire bite and points out that his heart is beating once again, something impossible for a vampire. Unknown to them, Frankie has secretly followed Edward the entire time. Now convinced that Audrey and her group are hiding humans, Frankie threatens to kill them unless Edward turns everyone over. But before anything can happen, a squad of soldiers suddenly arrives. Frankie had secretly called them in to assist with the capture. With Elvis's vehicle destroyed, the group has no choice but to escape in Edward's car. A high-speed chase follows, and during the pursuit a bullet tears through the vehicle. Sunlight immediately begins pouring inside, burning Edward and forcing Elvis to take over the wheel. After they finally manage to escape and the situation calms down, Elvis reveals the incredible truth behind how he became human again. Elvis explains that years ago, while driving at high speed, he was involved in a serious accident. The crash threw him from the vehicle, leaving him exposed to direct sunlight for several seconds before he fell into a river. By all logic, he should have died. But somehow, Elvis survived. When he regained consciousness, he noticed something impossible. His eyes had returned to their normal dark color, and his heart was beating again. To prove to himself that he was truly cured, Elvis stepped out into the sunlight without any protection. Nothing happened. The vampire infection was gone. After hearing his story, Edward, Audrey, and Elvis head to a secret human resistance hideout to investigate scientifically how such a recovery could be possible. During the journey, Audrey notices signs that Edward's condition is worsening. Concerned for him, she deliberately cuts her own hand and allows him to drink a small amount of blood so he can regain his strength. Upon arriving at the hideout, Edward is introduced to the remaining human survivors. More groups are reportedly still on their way to join them. Audrey finally reveals why she brought Edward there. The goal is not merely to save a handful of survivors. They want to restore humanity itself. If they can understand what happened to Elvis, they might be able to cure every vampire and bring the human race back from the brink of extinction. Meanwhile, Charles Bromley summons Frankie and thanks him for reporting Edward's activities. To Charles, Edward is no longer a scientist but a traitor. Charles orders Frankie to capture his own brother for the sake of vampire society. Frankie agrees, believing that becoming a vampire gave his life purpose and meaning. Afterward, Charles visits the company's blood storage facility and discovers a horrifying reality. The supply of captive humans has nearly run out. At the current rate of consumption, the corporation has less than a month before its entire blood production system collapses. If that happens, the company will go bankrupt, and vampire civilization itself could begin to fall apart. The crisis isn't limited to corporate executives. Ordinary vampires are suffering as well. As blood prices continue to skyrocket, many citizens can no longer afford regular supplies. More and more vampires are beginning to show symptoms of severe blood deprivation. Their ears become pointed, their appearance deteriorates, and desperation drives some of them to rob blood stores just to survive. The following day, Edward carefully analyzes samples of Elvis's blood. Surprisingly, everything appears completely normal. No obvious abnormalities. No miracle chemical. No clear explanation. Since laboratory tests reveal nothing useful, Edward concludes that the only way to recreate Elvis's recovery is to repeat the circumstances that caused it. That means exposing a vampire to direct sunlight. And the volunteer for the experiment is Edward himself. Using an old airtight wine tank, the group prepares a controlled test. The plan is simple. Elvis will create a small opening that allows sunlight to enter the chamber, while Audrey controls the ventilation system and releases the trapped heat once Edward has endured enough exposure. Late that night, while preparations continue, attention shifts to another group of human survivors traveling toward the hideout. Unfortunately, disaster strikes. Frankie and his soldiers have already discovered the convoy's location. The vampires launch a surprise attack. Although the survivors are armed with crossbows capable of instantly killing vampires, they are badly outnumbered. The fierce battle quickly turns into a massacre. In the end, Frankie's forces capture the entire group. Among the prisoners is none other than Charles Bromley's own daughter. Before losing contact, one of the survivors manages to warn Elvis over the radio that the convoy will never reach the hideout. But the message is cut short. Frankie seizes the radio and uses it to track the transmission, successfully uncovering the location of Elvis, Audrey, and Edward. Realizing their hideout has been compromised, Elvis immediately orders everyone to pack their belongings and prepare to move to another secret location. However, Audrey refuses to abandon the experiment. The cure is too important, and all the preparations have already been completed. Determined to see it through, Audrey, Elvis, and Edward head straight to the testing site. Armed with wet towels to help cool Edward's body after the procedure, they each take their positions. The plan begins. Elvis opens a small hole in the chamber, allowing sunlight to pour inside. Edward endures the intense burning for as long as possible. Once he reaches his limit, Audrey quickly opens the ventilation valve to release the trapped heat and prevent him from dying. The gamble pays off. Just like Elvis before him, Edward is successfully cured. For the first time in years, he is human again. But their celebration is cut short when Frankie and his soldiers finally discover the hideout and begin storming the warehouse. After narrowly escaping, Edward experiences something he thought he would never feel again. He breathes fresh air, feels the warmth of the sun on his skin, and enjoys life as a human being once more. Believing the immediate danger has passed, Elvis takes Edward and Audrey to a garage so they can reunite with the rest of the survivors. When they arrive at the second safe house, they are met with a horrifying sight. Everyone is dead. The remaining survivors have been slaughtered by troops acting under Charles Bromley's orders. Tired of running and hiding, Edward decides it's time to fight back. He plans to contact a fellow scientist and convince him to help develop the cure. Meanwhile, Charles's daughter is being held inside her father's headquarters. Unlike Charles, who loves being a vampire because it grants immortality and freedom from disease, she would rather remain human. To her, humanity means compassion, while vampirism is built on violence and killing. Charles has no intention of accepting her choice. Because vampires cannot be transformed with a simple bite alone, he orders her to be taken to an isolation chamber where she will be forcibly turned into a vampire. Frankie is assigned to oversee the process, but things quickly spiral out of control. Before receiving fresh blood, Charles's daughter intentionally injures herself. The resulting blood deprivation pushes her toward a dangerous transformation. Soon she begins mutating into a subsider. The change happens rapidly, and she completely loses control, even attacking her own father. At the same time, the vampire crisis is reaching catastrophic levels. As the human population continues to decline, more than 40% of vampires have already transformed into feral subsiders. The government responds by deploying military units across the city to hunt them down and prevent widespread attacks. After capturing dozens of subsiders, soldiers transport them to open areas and execute them by exposing them to direct sunlight. Among those taken away is Charles's own daughter. As night falls, the story shifts to the home of Edward's scientist colleague. The man returns from work only to find Edward, Audrey, and Elvis already waiting for him. Edward explains that he has discovered a genuine cure for vampirism, something far more effective than the synthetic blood project that continues to fail. He hopes the scientist will join their cause and help save both humans and vampires. At first, the man appears willing to listen. Then he receives a mysterious phone call. After excusing himself, he steps into the kitchen to continue the conversation in private. Sensing that something is wrong, Audrey quietly follows him. What she doesn't realize is that the scientist has already been cooperating with the military, and their location may have just been betrayed. Unfortunately, Audrey is eventually captured and taken to headquarters, where she is handed over to Charles. Meanwhile, Edward and Elvis escape through another side of the building to avoid the soldiers pursuing them. Their desperate retreat eventually leads them into an abandoned warehouse. Moments later, Frankie arrives. Still obsessed with capturing his brother, Frankie refuses to listen when Edward tries to explain that he has finally discovered a cure for vampirism. Frankie has fully embraced life as a vampire and wants nothing to do with becoming human again. Without warning, he lunges forward and bites Elvis. As chaos erupts between them, Edward takes the opportunity to leave and head straight for Charles's headquarters in a final attempt to rescue Audrey. But things do not go as planned. Since Edward is now completely human, the guards stationed at the entrance immediately recognize him as an outsider. He is captured and dragged before Charles. Being the ruthless businessman that he is, Charles has no interest in Edward's offer of a cure. In his eyes, Edward is nothing more than a traitor who betrayed vampire society. Determined to silence him once and for all, Charles bites Edward. Then something extraordinary happens. Only seconds later, Charles's body begins convulsing violently. To everyone's shock, he transforms back into a human. At last, the truth becomes clear. There is another cure besides controlled sunlight exposure. Anyone who drinks the blood of a former vampire can also be cured. That means Frankie's bite on Elvis has already cured him as well. Realizing Charles is temporarily weakened, Edward seizes the opportunity to escape and continue searching for Audrey and the others. As soldiers gather outside the facility, an even stranger scene unfolds inside. Charles is restrained to a chair while the scent of fresh human blood spreads through the building. The situation quickly spirals out of control. During their escape, Edward and Audrey find themselves surrounded by soldiers closing in from every direction. Just when all hope seems lost, Frankie arrives. Now fully cured and finally understanding what Edward was fighting for, he chooses to help them. Frankie throws himself into the battle and distracts the soldiers, allowing Edward and Audrey to escape. But the cost is devastating. Frankie sacrifices himself so that his brother can survive. While Frankie is overwhelmed by vampires and soldiers alike, Edward fights his way through the facility, taking down several guards before finally reaching safety. From a nearby surveillance room, Edward witnesses something incredible. As cured humans are bitten by vampires, and those newly cured humans are then bitten by others, the cure begins spreading from person to person like a chain reaction. One after another, vampires throughout the facility start turning back into humans. Without even realizing it, Edward has discovered a way to save an entire civilization. Just as he prepares to leave, his former scientist colleague suddenly appears and points a shotgun at him. The man was never interested in saving humanity. His goals are completely different, and Edward now stands in his way. Before the scientist can pull the trigger, Elvis arrives at the last second and kills him. The immediate threat is over, but Edward's victory feels hollow. He soon discovers that Frankie has died during the battle. The brother who once hunted him ultimately gave his life to save him and help secure humanity's future. And that brings us to the end of the story. The film's message is clear. Civilizations rarely collapse because they are weak. More often, they fall because they tolerate their own destruction for far too long. We are close to 1,000 subscribers, so don't forget to like and sub. Meet you in the next one. Thank you for watching.